our last day. Roman, take that in your room or my room, please. Okay, we are going to finish up with the snow and stars. So we're going to use some of the yellow and some of the gray. If you still have some white, you could mix some white in there as well. I would recommend, if you got a kit, or if you're worried about running out of white, I would do your snow first and then decide if you want to put some white in with the snowflakes and stars. Or if you're not worried about it and can get more white, I just know this takes quite a bit of thread. So if you're worried, then don't do white. Okay. Whoa! I didn't mean to pull that all the way out. I just wanted to pull it out a little bit. Now I'm gonna have to take it all the way down. Okay. I think I'm just gonna put it in sideways. Oh, but first, okay, so we're gonna do just some cross stitches and some French knots. So when we're doing French knots, I like to teach those on their own fabric so that you can see some differences of French knots and colonial knots. So let me move this. Oh, I'm wearing, it's sweater season, so it means that we will have things all over our sweaters. Okay, so we are going to find a marker. So French knots, the difference in size will depend on how many threads you're using and how many times you wrap the French knot. So over here, we're gonna do how many times we're wrapping it and then how many strands we're using. So we're gonna use 3 strands or 6 strands, and then we're gonna wrap it once, twice, and 3 times. And then we'll do colonial knots at the bottom. Okay. So I'm just gonna show you with a scrap piece. If you want to practice, this is a really great way to practice French knots. Let me get out. I'm just gonna use some of this green that I have left over. Well, oh yeah, I did finish my trees. I was gonna say, maybe it's not left over, it's just out. Okay, so French knots. We need a knot at the end. Okay, so French knots start from the back. And then what we're doing is we're making a knot with our threads. So what we're gonna do is wrap it around our needle 1 time, and then we're gonna go back down. We're not using the same hole. We're moving it over just a little bit. If you use the same hole, you're more likely to pull your knot through your fabric, and we don't want to do that. So I like to hold, if I don't have a hoop stand, then I'm usually holding my hoop with my fingers and then holding on to the thread as well. So we want to hold on to, I usually hold on to it until, well, I'll do it again. Okay. If you need to hold your hoop and your thread at the same time. Then we're wrapping it once, we're going down, we're moving our knot to the bottom of our needle, and then we're pushing our needle through, and we're gonna hold on to this part of our thread until our knot is about there, and then we can let it go. Or you can hold it until it gets closer if you're worried about it. But that's a French knot. So for 2 wraps, we're gonna go around it 2 times, and then we're gonna go back down in our fabric. We're gonna move our knot to the bottom so it's by our fabric, and then pull it through. Now, the thing with French knots is making sure that you don't twist the thread too tight and you don't like that you're not wrapping it too tight, because if it's too tight, it's really hard to pull through your needle. So there's just kind of that happy medium where it's tight enough that it stays as a French knot, but it's not too tight that you can't pull your needle through. And it really just takes practice. I'm gonna do one more like that. See, this one I did a little bit too far away, so it has kind of a little bit of a tail right there. I did where I put it back down was a little too far away. So I'm gonna wrap it once, twice, put that back down. Now, if your needle is not all the way through your fabric yet, if it's like right here, you can still pull this back out and that will just untwist. So that's always a fun idea if you're trying to decide what size French knot you want to make. You can kind of push that down to the end and look at it and say, no, that's not too, I want that a little bit bigger, I want that a little bit smaller or whatever. So you can kind of look at it and decide if that's what size you want. Okay, and then 3 wraps. I don't usually recommend wrapping more than 3 times unless you're purposefully making like big fluffy French knots, like for clouds or bushes or something. But sometimes I use this finger to like hold on and like move my thread up if it's kind of in the way. This is my favorite stitch to do if I have a hoop stand, because then I can use my hands. Well, I'll show you when I'm using my hoop stand, but it does make it easier to do French knots if you have a hoop stand, because you have to use 2 hands. So we're gonna wrap 1, 2, 3. And there we go. So this is gonna be our smallest French knot, medium size, a little bit bigger. They poke up a little bit. Okay, so to get a bigger French knot is we just use more thread. You can use 1 strand, you can use 2, you can use 4, you can use 5, you can use whatever you want. I just am doing 3 and 6 just to kind of show you the difference. The other thing with French knots is if you cut one, you kind of have to cut them all because they're all connected. So that is one issue with French knots, is if you have to cut out one French knot, you're kind of stuck cutting all of them. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now we're gonna do 6 strands. So I'm just gonna tie my 2 ends together because I've already got 3 in my needle. So I'm just gonna double it over. This is another good trick for French knots if you want thicker French knots, is to just do half the amount of thread and then double it over, because then you're not trying to pull, because right now I'm gonna pull 6 strands through my knot, but if I had 6 strands in my needle and then I doubled it, you know, with a tail, then you're trying to pull 12 strands through your French knot. So that is my other tip for French knots, is if you want bigger French knots, try just doubling your thread over and tying the 2 ends together. Okay, so 6 strands. You're gonna do them the same way. It just will make your French knots a little bit bigger. So like these 2 are about the same size. So you can have like a larger French knot with less wraps. And then same thing, when you wrap it twice, it'll be about this size. So if you're new to French knots, it might be a fun idea to get just a scrap piece of fabric and make something like this so that you can, first of all, practice, but second of all, you can kind of just put these out so you can see like different sizes. This is another way. Sometimes I'll just lay my hoop down on a table or on my lap, and I will do this part, get it down to the bottom, and then pick up my hoop. So if you're having a hard time holding your hoop, then try putting it down. Just laying it down wrapping it 3 times or whatever, however many times, scooting it to the bottom. Keep holding on with your fingers so that your thread stays tight. But then you can pull that through a little bit easier. So now look at that size difference. So even now, like these are still like slightly bigger than these, but it's kind of close in size. Maybe even like this one and this one are closer. So one thing I do like about French knots is if you want to do something like bushes or clouds and you want them to be fluffy, you just do a French knot, but you don't pull it as tight. So just wrap it loosely. Do you see how loose that is? I'm gonna pull it a little bit tight, but for the most part, I'm just gonna leave it loose. So then you can see like how puffy that is. And then you have like this big fun knot, which is hard to see on video, but another thing, if you have a French knot that is not quite as tight as you wanted it to be, like you wanted it tight, but it's not. So right now it's kind of loose and fluffy. If you don't want it that way, you can come up just on the side of it. Like I'm coming up like right, oh, hold on, let's see, hold on. So I'm coming up like right next to it. So I'm not in the knot, I'm to the side of it. And then you can go ahead and go through the center again and just like tack that down. I have done this so many times to avoid unpicking knots, because especially if you're doing something with a lot of French knots, you don't want to start unpicking those because that's not fun. So anyways, you can kind of just tack it down like that. It'll make it bigger, but at least it won't be like a weird shape or like funky. Does that make sense? Okay. So that is French knots. Let me get a new piece of thread and we will do colonial knots as well. Some people who do not like French knots, they have an easier time with colonial knots. So if you're not loving French knots, honestly, I would say to practice both and see which one you prefer, because you may like one better than the other, and then you can do knots and be happy about them. Okay, I'm gonna get red out. How many strands is this? This is 3, okay. So the difference with colonial knots is you can only make a bigger knot by using more strands. Like you don't wrap it more times to make it bigger. Like a French knot, you can have wrapped once, twice, or 3 times to make it a different size. Colonial knots, you have to use more strands if you want a bigger colonial knot. So we're gonna do 3 strands and 6 strands. Okay, colonial knots. This one is really hard for me to hold, so I almost always will put mine down. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna make a backwards C, okay? And we're gonna come up inside the C and point this point to the left. And we're gonna wrap this tail up over the top and back around. So then we have like an infinity sign or a figure 8, whatever you want to call it. And that's how we're going to get our knot. So then we're going to put our needle back down, bring our knot to the bottom, and then pull it through. What I like about colonial knots is I can make them a lot more uniformed. Like I can make 10 French knots and they might not all look the same. But colonial knots, I feel like I can make them look the same nearly every time. So they're kind of fun for that. I'm gonna zoom in just a little here. Okay, so we've got our backwards C. We're gonna come up on the inside, point our needle to the left. We're gonna come up over the top and around the bottom to make our figure 8. And then we're gonna pull it snug, put our needle back in our fabric, bring it down to the bottom. And then we'll pick up our hoop and pull that through. Okay, what do we think? Colonial knots, fun? Same with colonial and French knots. If you have to cut one, you have to cut multiple. Unless you've got like a big piece in the back, then you can sometimes like tie them off, but. Okay. Now we've got 6 strands. Same thing, I'm just gonna double it over. Okay, so we've got our backwards C. We're gonna come under it. Oh, this piece is too short. Hold on. When I'm doing knots, I have to have a long piece. I can't do knots with a short piece. I can, but they don't turn out very good, so. Now you can put 6 strands in here. I'm not saying you cannot, it's just, it makes it harder. I'm going to, just because I don't wanna pull these apart. Okay, so we're gonna come up from the back. We're going to make our backwards C for colonial. We're gonna come up, point to the left, wrap up and around, back down. And then the same thing as the French knots. You're not using the same hole to put your needle back down. Oh yeah, that's harder to pull. You wanna go just next to it. If you're doing a big enough knot, it doesn't matter as much, but I don't know, I think it's just a good habit to get into, so. All right, here we go, last one. There we go. Look at all those knots. Woohoo! Okay, are we ready? Are we ready to do some stars and snowflakes? I'm ready. Okay. Whoa. Okay. Hold on. Okay, so I'm gonna do some of the like plus signs. I'm gonna do some of them stars and some of them snowflakes so that they're like scattered. And then we're gonna go in and do some French knots. So I am first going to do some stars. So I'm gonna mix yellow and white. But you can do all yellow if you want. I'm going to do 2 strands of the yellow, which is 3078, and 1 strand of white, which is Blanc. Hold on, I gotta get out some white, just a second. I just want them to be a little bit softer, which is why I'm mixing in a strand of white. But I think that it will look perfectly beautiful with all yellow as well. So if you don't feel like you have enough white, don't worry about it. Okay, let me just get these in my needle. Oh my goodness, hang on. This yellow does not want to go in. Struggling to thread a needle. Here we go. All right. Okay, so for this bigger star, we're just gonna do like some straight stitches. So I'm just gonna start at the top here and work my way into the middle. When I do stars like this, I like them to have, I drew this crooked, so I'm just gonna stitch it straighter. I like to stitch them into the center. You can just do like one stitch, one stitch, one stitch, one stitch. I sometimes feel like that gets a little bulky. And so I usually do some of the stitches into the middle and then I cross the ones on top. So these ones are all into the center, and then these ones that are like the X part, I will cross over the top. So then that center doesn't get too bulky, but it still looks like a complete star. You could also have all of them go into the middle. If you don't like that crossed look on top, you could have all of your stitches go out to the center. That's totally fine as well. Now, we are going, you can cut your thread between every single one of these if you want. I don't want to. And because these are lighter colored threads, I'm not gonna worry about trailing threads behind my work. So just so you know, that's what I'm doing. I want you to do what you want to do. So I'm just gonna pick some random spots to put in some stars. And just kind of scatter those. Now these ones only have 2 stitches, and so I'm just gonna cross them. So the rest of these pluses, I will come back with the white and gray and make them snowflakes. Clear over here. Okay. So then my back looks a little bit crazy with this going on, but I am not going to worry about it. Okay, so now I'm gonna keep with my colors. I'm gonna do some yellow and white in my needle, and I'm going to do some stars. Let's see. Sorry, I've got to get out some more yellow. I only had 2 strands left. one, there's two. I've got some white. So I'm gonna keep with the 3 strands because I want them to look fairly consistent. And I don't want like big bulky stars. I just want them twinkling, right? That threaded much easier. Okay. So I'm just gonna go in here and do some French knots. I prefer French knots, so I am going to do French knots for my stars. But if you prefer colonial knots, I would do 2 or 3 strands. I would stick to kind of that amount of strands to keep these kind of small. I'm doing 3 strands and I'm wrapping it one time because I want them to stay pretty small. And if you drew the stars and stuff on there, then use those dots. But I didn't draw the dots, I just drew some pluses. So I'm just randomly throwing in some stitches here. See how much easier it is with a hoop stand? I don't have to like grab my hoop. It's not a requirement for sure, but it does make things easier. Especially, I've seen people do pieces where it's like all French knots, and that's a good time to have a hoop stand out. Okay. Let me so that's all I'm gonna do for now. I need to hold mine in my hand so I can see if I want to add more. So I'm gonna leave it like this for now. I'm gonna do some of the sky, I'm gonna do some of the snow, and then I'll decide after the live if I want to add more. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna do 1 white and 2 gray. The white is not going to show up great on this fabric, which is why I'm doing gray and white. But if you're using a dark fabric, you could totally get away with just white. Or you could also get away with just gray. It's a very light gray, so if you're out of white, just gray will be totally fine. Okay. Get this in my needle. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and do the snowflakes as X's instead of pluses. You can stick with the plus signs if you want, or you can change them to X's. So now you could also do the French knots at the same time. So I could come in and do the X and then do a French knot. And then come over here. Come on. And do another French knot. I guess I totally could have done that with the stars too. I don't know why I didn't think of it. You could do 2 French knots together, do one here, and then do another like right next to it. So you have like a bunch of little snowflakes all together. You could do little bundles of X's if you wanted as well. Throw in some extra snow. if you have a stash of like the metallic thread or like the atoll thread, this could also be super fun with some sparkly thread. Anyways, I think you get the picture. Whoop. There we go. So I'm gonna let you finish. Let me lower this a little bit. I'm gonna let you finish the rest on your own. Down here with the pluses and dots and stuff, I'm going to do just snow down here. I feel like this is, hold on. It feels like it's blurry. Was it blurry the whole time? Anyways, so down here, I'm just going to do snow. I'm not going to do any of the yellow. If you have extra white, you could also do like lines on top of the snow or on top of the trees, depending on what you have left. Anyways, I'm going to work on finishing this weekend. And then next week, we will finish the backs. So, finish up your stitching and then I'll show you how to finish these next week if you don't already know how. I know some people already know how to finish a back, but if you need support for that, I will be doing that next week. But I do want to give you enough time to finish your stitching before we do that. So thank you so much for stitching with me. I'm gonna leave it here for the day. I'm gonna work on it some more and then I will post some pictures in my stories. And then I will be around. So if you have questions when you get working on this, let me know. But yeah, that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much for joining in. I hope you had fun. I had fun. I just need to catch up with this week. So anyways, have a good weekend. Let me know if you have questions and I will see you next week. Stay tuned for a date on that. Bye.